Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm thrilled to have back with me once again my good friend David Burkus, who's got a new book coming out called Pick a Fight. It's all about how underdogs really rule the world. David, it's great to have you back with us.
Oh, it's great to be back. Thank you so much. I mean, as a lifelong underdog feeling myself, I love that idea. I mean, I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the United States, which is like the quintessential underdog city, right? So I love that. I love that. There's a lot of different fights that people can go after. Some are motivating or some are not, but for me personally, that underdog fight is definitely it.
Now, Pick a Fight, it's a pretty sort of controversial title. We're all taught to be nice and peaceful and to try and resolve everything with our words, but why do you pick that title?
Yeah, so there's a couple things I'm trying to do with that title. I mean, the first is I'm trying to win back the term fight. Exactly like you said, there's two problems that I really see with it. The first is that most people, when they hear it, again, there's sort of we should be less combative, we should be more camaraderie, et cetera. And that's true, but that doesn't really square with human nature. I mean, the way that I say it, people don't want to join a company, they want to join a crusade. We want to know that there's a cause, that there's a deeper sort of purpose in that. And for time immemorial, the big deep purpose has been pointing to an evil or an injustice in the world and trying to remove it, right? The second reason or the second misconception I see around this word fight is that we often think it's about competitors, right? Like, unfortunately, especially in the United States, the idea of business as war has been a metaphor that has been used and abused too much. And one of the most interesting things I found in doing the research is that those sort of that trash talk, fight dirty rhetoric that we hear often about competitors doesn't motivate anybody. Well, it actually does motivate people. It motivates your competitors, but it doesn't actually motivate your people all that much to perform. So we're really trying to take back this term fight and turn it back into more, what are you fighting for, not who are you fighting. It's not about the battle in between people. It's about that bigger thing that you're trying to fight. And I'm not the first person to talk about, having a real purpose-driven organization. I mean, that's like a 20-year-old concept in popular terms, between purpose-driven, the idea of real mission and vision, or start with why. All of these have pointed to the idea that this is important. But I think where all of them failed is then they go, so you should do it. And then leaders aren't left with a model for how do I know if I have a good one? And as a result, we get crappy mission statements like to increase shareholder value while maintaining the highest ethical standard, right? Which is, first of all, nobody believes you're going to do either of those things, right? Partly because a lot of times they're contradictory. It's hard to increase shareholder value while also maintaining ethics. But also, if that's your purpose, is just shareholder value, that's not motivating your people, right? They want something bigger. People don't want to join a company. They want to join a crusade. And so what I found is that the easy litmus test for whether or not your team or your whole company, whatever, has a true purpose that really does motivate and inspire people is if I walked into your office and I pointed to one of your people and I said, what are you fighting for? And they understood the question, even if you've never used fight rhetoric before and you never use it again after listening to this podcast. If your people understand that question and can give me an answer, then you have done a great job distilling that purpose, making it seem like there are stakes behind that purpose, and letting people know how they're helping achieve that purpose. And from there, you're good. I don't care if you use the fight rhetoric or not. But I find that it makes a great litmus test for whether or not you have a mission, a vision, a purpose, a why, whatever you want to call it, whether or not you have one that actually motivates people.
So what is this challenge or the meaning behind the title you chose, Pick a Fight?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a bit of a double meaning, right? So there's that idea of pick a fight, like when you just go pick a fight with somebody, at a bar, or or people. I'm a big fan of mixed martial arts, and you always see people right when you win a fight, like they always ask, who do you want to fight next, right? And so they literally start trash talking, pro wrestling style to other people. So there's that idea of picking a fight, right? But the big hidden meaning is that you also have to choose your fight wisely, because a fight against competitive companies very rarely motivates. And in fact, I found in looking at the different research, I came up with 3 different sort of templates of fights, types of fights, or types of revolutions, you might call them, whatever term you want to use, that actually do have a motivating effect. And they each have a little bit different motivating effect on people. And so it's pick a fight, like you have to find that thing that is worth fighting for, but you also have to choose your fight wisely, hence the double meaning.
And let's go through some examples. I mean, it sounds like picking a fight. We're now talking about trying to get the most out of your people by getting them sort of aligned towards what the company is trying to achieve. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, but it's not, and it goes beyond that in the sense that what the fight does is it introduces stakes, right? It's not just what we're trying to achieve. Like a lot of companies will do this and they'll just talk about growth, right? Or they'll just talk about like Facebook is a great example. Their mission for the longest time was sort of to connect the world, which is great, but there's no stakes to that. And in fact, as soon as the world wanted to be a little bit less connected, what do they end up doing? They end up doing all sorts of things that we're still unpacking ethically and morally. And so it's another example of how that can sort of go wrong. You need to point to what those stakes are, what bad thing will happen or what good thing will not happen if we don't work together towards this mission. And the best way that I found to describe that again is a fight against that negative future.
So let's sort of go through some examples. What's a company that's actually done this pick a fight concept quite well?
Yeah. So there's let me give you the 3 templates and I'll give you an example for each. That'll probably be the easiest thing to do. So the 3 fights that you can sort of choose from as a template are what I call the revolutionary fight, the underdog fight, and the ally fight. And the revolutionary fight, real quick, is when you can point to the industry usually, or you can point to something, a lot of times it's an environmental fight these days, but you can point to something that the industry finds acceptable and you as a leader can say, we refuse to accept that any longer. Right? It could be because it's unethical. It could be because it's damaging to the environment. It could be because it's the wrong way to treat your customers, whatever it is. And in the book, I use the example of Ellevest, which is a United States-based retirement. I mean, it's not an investment firm, right? And really, it's a robo-advisor. The best way to describe it is it's like Wealthfront and Betterment and all these other places where you give them your money and a computer algorithm looks at your age and all that sort of stuff and decides what is the right mix of safe and risky investments and all that sort of thing. And it changes over time as you go through. The company was actually founded because Sally Krawcheck, who had decades of experience in Wall Street and was really at multiple times the most influential female in all of Wall Street, ended up finding that, it wasn't that there's this great stigma that women aren't cut out for Wall Street. And she was like, no, this is wrong. The problem is that Wall Street isn't cut out for women. The problem is that they don't consider them. And what she found considerably, even in these robo-advisors, is they assumed as an investor that you were a male. They assumed your level of risk tolerance was a male. They assumed your longevity was a male, right? Women live longer than men on average. They assumed that you wouldn't have any career gaps for caregiving, like for children or for elderly parents or whatever, which is, again, much more likely to happen for males and females. Unfair, but an unfair reality of where we're in. And so she said, basically, the whole industry finds this acceptable. I kept going to over and over and over again to different firms and saying, this is unacceptable. You have to give people this different environment. You can't just assume this. And nobody would listen to her. I mean, literally at one point, she explained the whole thing. And one CEO of a Wall Street firm, response was, well, don't their husbands just do this for them? Right? Like totally, you don't get it, right? 90% of women will manage their money on their own at some point in their career, right? So she decides, okay, fine. If you can't, if you can't, I guess it's the opposite of if you can't beat them, join them. If you can't join them and change their mind, you got to beat them. And so she picked a fight with the whole industry and said, we're going to start a robo-advisor that assumes you're a female, that is built for the idea that you make less per dollar, that you have to make your money live longer, that you're less risk tolerant. And if you're a guy, I mean, interestingly enough, it's really the only gender fair robo-advisor, because if you're a male, you can still set an account and say that you're a male and it'll change, but it's the only one that caters exclusively to that. And the results have been really fantastic just in that company, right? So they have a lower cost of customer acquisition than pretty much any other investment firm in the industry. They have a much higher rate. They were actually named like one of the top 25 companies to work in, not just in Wall Street, but in general a couple years back. They have an incredibly diverse staff. You'd think it would just be a bunch of females, but it's a male and female. It's everybody working together towards this cause, because Sally Krawcheck basically pointed to the industry and said, you keep thinking this is acceptable. We refuse to accept that. We're going to change that. So that's the revolutionary fight. The underdog fight, and like I said earlier, is my favorite one. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. If you don't know anything else about Philadelphia in the United States, know this. our greatest sports hero is a fictional character who loses a boxing match, right? Rocky Balboa from Philadelphia, right? We love to tell that story. And he loses, he doesn't even win in the first one, right? But yet we love, and we made, I don't even know how many movies at this point. But if you watch the first movie, there's something specific that he actually says, which is, I don't want to beat Apollo Creed. I just want to go to the distance because then I'll shut everybody up and then I won't be a bum, right? He wants to prove to the world it's not a bum. And that's the core of the underdog fight, which is the industry doesn't respect us. Our competitors don't respect us. They think either we're overrated or we're too small to make a difference, et cetera. But it's not just that you are small. It's not just that you get rejected. You also have to have a rebuttal, right? So it's not just the industry thinks we're overrated. Here's why they're wrong, or here's how we're going to prove that they're wrong. My favorite example for this, and it's actually not in the book, is the company Netflix. Not only because, I've been watching a lot of it. I'm sure you have recently as well, as we're all sort of at home much more often than we plan. But if you look at the history of Netflix, we're all familiar with the disruptive innovation story of Blockbuster having the chance to buy Netflix, and they didn't, and then Netflix bankrupted them, et cetera. What a lot of people don't know, and really has only come out relatively recently, is that they should have rejected Netflix. Netflix was losing money. Netflix was weeks away from having to close up shop. And all signs pointed to the idea that the foreseeable future was bricks and mortar, that people just, they weren't moving to a company like Netflix soon enough. And so they went to that meeting with Blockbuster out of desperation, because they basically said, if we don't get acquired, I don't know how we stay open. And they got rejected. They actually had a pretty modest offer for what they wanted to be purchased by, or like the amount that they wanted to be purchased for. And they still got rejected. But what they got in that, what Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph and all the other senior leaders of Netflix got out of that, was a story to take back and go, hey, look, the established players don't respect us, don't think we're good enough, and we're going to prove them wrong. And you know the story, they did. But then they did it again, right? And then again, because then they said, okay, we've established, we basically we ruined every company in the movie rental space. Now we're going to go after cable, and we're going to go direct with streaming. We're going to go over the top. Then they basically beat that. Most people, I mean, my cable company has an option to watch Netflix on it, right? Which is the ultimate you win. We'll just give you Netflix because that's what you want anyway. And then they went again and said, all right, now we're going to pick a fight with Hollywood. Now we're going to pick a fight with television. We think we have a better way to produce film and television and TV specials and all of that sort of stuff. And so every single time they win a fight, they look for another, not just another fight, but another underdog fight, because their people, I think, are highly motivated by that idea that we're changing the industry by proving these established players wrong. And there's actually a lot of good research that suggests that you're more creative, innovative. You come up with more creative solutions when you're backed in the corner. We can unpack that a little bit later. The third fight is the ally fight, which is actually really simple to explain. The ally fight is quite simply, it's not about our fight at all. It's about their fight. And we help them win that fight. And they is most often customers, but it can also be a certain stakeholder or a community, or it can be one ally fight that I'm a huge admirer of is the WD-40 company, and their ally is themselves. If you ask them what they do, their goal is to create a company where everybody thrives, a company where everybody's engaged, a company where people can be their full selves. They just happen to sell an oil that makes stuff squeak less, right? But what they sell and who they sell it to is not part of their mission at all. Their mission is this other thing where the ally is themselves. But then you have other companies where the ally literally is the customer, where it's all about the idea. My favorite recent one is an organization I worked with in Savannah, Georgia in the United States. They're a minor league baseball team. They literally play in the summer. They use college athletes. Like, it's the most minor of the minor. But unlike every other minor league team, they're sold out for their entire season. They're the most entertaining thing you can go to. They're called the Savannah Bananas, and their goal is literally to mix a baseball game, which is super boring. And I'm saying that as an American who finds football/soccer boring, right? I also find baseball boring. But they spice it up. They're like a mix of that and a 3-ring circus. And their whole idea is that most sports entertainment is ripping off families and is ripping off its own fans. And we're not going to do that. We're fighting for our fans by giving them an experience that's not a ripoff, that's authentic, that'll actually get kids engaged in wanting to spend time with their families, et cetera. Their ally is their fans. And unlike every other sport, they're not going to rip them off.
I mean, all of those are fantastic examples. I'd like to go to the creativity research that you mentioned, because my fans, they are all about the science and all about the insights. So you mentioned there's some research supporting being an underdog actually makes you more creative.
Yeah, so most of the research on underdogs actually all comes from the same person, and it's relatively recent research. I mean, there is some research around 10 years and 20 years ago around the idea that in a lot of like some economics research that people who are underrated win more often than they should, right? They don't win all the time, but they win more often than the stats would predict they should. And so that motivating effect has been really relatively proven. But there's a gentleman by the name of Samir Nurmohamed, who was a PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania, and did most of his PhD research and now is working on sort of refining it as a researcher around this idea of the underdog. And so he started studying it in a couple different ways. It probably his most famous study is actually a study of job seekers and whether or not they saw their career through this underdog narrative, this unappreciated narrative, like they don't get how valuable I am, which really helps them deal with rejection. But one study in particular dealt with setting up participants in negotiation and basically saying, had them do a pretest and put them into basically three categories. One was, hey, based on your pretest, we don't expect you to do well in negotiating. You're not a good negotiator. This is the underdog, right? The other was middle. Hey, you've got pretty decent odds. And then the other was, hey, we actually think you're going to win, right? And I think if I remember right, there was a fourth control group where they just didn't say anything. They just had them do the pretest. And what they found consistently is that there were the people who they said would be a wash was basically a wash. The people that were favored was basically a wash, but the underdogs won or came out with better terms in the negotiation. And the single reason when they went back and looked through the transcript of all of these paired negotiations that they had participants go through, the single defining factor of it all was that the underdogs came up with solutions, win-win scenarios and that sort of thing that that the other two groups didn't even come up with, right? So they were thinking more creatively, presumably. So here's what I think happened. Presumably when you're in the underdog situation, you realize that the traditional methods are not going to work for you, right? So the idea of positional bargaining where you stake out a number, and all this crap negotiating advice you've ever been heard, right? Which is like, be the second person to name a number and anchor them away. They couldn't do any of that, right? So they had to basically go, all right, let's get a little creative here. Let's think of ways that are win-win, et cetera. And then you see that the reason I love this study is, yes, it was just negotiation and it's just one. I mean, it's a decent sample size, but it's just one study. But you see it in practice all the time. I mean, I joked about it earlier. I'm from Philadelphia, where the underdog city. A couple years ago in American rules football, the Philadelphia Eagles beat like the only football dynasty there is, the New England Patriots. And they did it by running these crazy, unexpected plays, right? They basically said, we're not going to win the normal game, so we have to go around that. And that's the same thing with Netflix. That's the same thing you see most often. The strategy for underdogs to win requires creative thinking, innovation. And so it draws it out of them. Samir Nurmohamed was the first person to like prove it in the lab, but we have seen it through business history, through sports history, through even our personal lives, time and time again, that when the normal system won't work for you, you've got to find some sort of hack, some sort of other way around it. And so the underdogs turn out to be the ones who actually hack their way to success.
It's interesting you mentioned Netflix because in the context of purpose-driven organizations, Netflix several years ago came out with what I consider probably the most important document in Silicon Valley history.
The culture deck.
Which is their HR document,
yeah,
where they basically tore up the process of telling employees what to do. They're the company that became famous for effectively giving their employees unlimited vacation days and saying, we trust you to do what's best for the company. So how does that sort of concept relate back to purpose and helping the company and also helping the employees all go towards a joint goal?
Yeah, so we should back up here too. One thing, I mean, I talked about it a bit in the ally fight idea, but one of the reasons I like fight is, as opposed to mission, vision, values, purpose, why, all that sort of thing, is that your fight doesn't always have to be the business model of the company. It doesn't always have to be what you sell and why you sell it. And Netflix is a great example, right? They offer entertainment, and they offer it first by mail because Reed Hastings didn't like late fees, then by streaming because it just was the more efficient way to do it. And that's important, but that's not necessarily the underdog narrative, the idea of this we trust our people narrative, that we're going to do these things differently. There's a lot of, when you really look under the surface, there's a lot of really successful companies for whom the fight that they're in is not necessarily the day-to-day business model. It's not what they sell or who they sell it to or whatever, right? And I think that's an important thing, right? Reed Hastings is using these different fights. And part of that, right, especially if you're going to do the underdog fight, you need two things. Like I said before, you need a rejection and a rebuttal. And some of that rebuttal has to be, you are the talented, smart people capable of knocking off Blockbuster. You can't do that and micromanage people. Right. So if you're going to say you are underrated, the industry doesn't think that we as a group are talented enough, we need a different way to think about talent in order for our people to actually feel like you're important enough. So the culture document sort of does that. I mean, they were really the first, and there are a number of other companies that followed, but they were what was the Patty McCord analogy? It was that we're not a family, we're a sports team, right? And so as long as we have work that you can do, that's valuable, that is beneficial to both of us, you're not just a butt in a chair. We're going to give you the opportunity to thrive. But when that opportunity is gone because we moved on to a different business model or the project's over or whatever, you need to respect that and you need to move to a different organization where you can be more successful. And we saw other people follow suit, right? You have Reid Hoffman and the Alliance, like the LinkedIn has a whole book about how it should be more about tours of duty. A lot of people have fallen in line with that idea. Me personally, I go either way. I think it depends on what your fight is. I think it is possible to have a successful business model where everybody feels like a family. But you have to, like a WD-40 company, you have to make that your fight, that your purpose. If your fight is we're going to knock off first Blockbuster, then cable, then Hollywood, you have to be rotating your talent so that you can do those things. So you have to think differently about how you achieve it. So I don't know enough because it's you can imagine the people at Netflix are awfully difficult to get interviews with, especially for research purposes. So I don't know enough to say that which one came first, this different way of thinking about talent or these different fights. I suspect the fights came first because that required a different way to think about talent. And that's based, again, somewhat anecdotally and also based on what interviews I can find in the research. The co-founder of Netflix just published a great book about how they basically did everything, which that combined with Patty McCord's book is like even better than the culture document, really, because it's a deeper peer under the hood.
Dave, it's been wonderful speaking with you, but before we go, for people and companies who actually want to take the ideas of picking a fight and implementing it in their own companies, it seems like such a sort of fundamentally different way of approaching sort of working with their own people. What are the sort of tips you can give as to how to actually implement some of these ideas?
Yeah. So the first thing, there's a misconception. Maybe this is the third. I could do a whole thing on these different misconceptions about purpose, but there's a misconception around leadership that your job is to cast a vision. So we often tell new managers or business owners or senior leaders, right, that it's about casting a vision and then getting buy-in for that vision, or developing strategy, getting buy-in for that strategy. In this case, I don't know that works. And I don't know that it's ever worked. I think what great leaders actually do is put to words the vision that already existed in their people, right? The example I always use is Martin Luther King Jr., the I Have a Dream speech on the Million Men March. 600,000 people came out to see that speech. Not a single one of them walked away thinking, oh, okay, that's Martin's dream. No, every single one of them was like, yes, that's my dream. And he found a way to finally describe it. Right? They brought that out of them. Leaders do the same thing. So I don't actually think it's about what you think your fight should be. It's about what fight will resonate with your people. And so my encouragement to you is to ask two simple questions. The first, and I think it works best if you just pull people aside for 5 minutes, mention they're not in trouble. This isn't some performance evaluation thing or whatever, but just ask two simple questions. The first is, what do we do here? Like, in your own words, what do we do? And they might talk about the product they sell. They might talk about how they are changing the industry. They might, whatever they talk about, just nod, find a way to capture it. And then the second question is, how does what you do help us do that? Which is really about whether or not they see how their role fits into that larger purpose. In my mind, it's a really good diagnostic, not only for how powerful that mission vision is currently, because if you get a single unified answer, then you're probably doing a good job. You probably won't have that. You will have a diversity of different answers. And when you look at the common themes, you might notice that most of your people talk about how your business operates inside its industry. Maybe it's trying to change the industry. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's talking about you are going after certain competitors because of something they do that's unethical. It's a really strong, both of those are really strong hint at the revolutionary fight. Maybe they talk about your customers the whole time, or whoever benefits from the work that you do. That's a really strong hint that it's the ally fight, right? So based on their answers to those two questions, once you've captured them from your whole team, you go back and you zoom out and you look at all those different answers, and you can start to sort of see which of these templates will resonate most with people. And then you can start having the conversation about how we specifically phrase our fight. But that's the place to get started, is to have that simple conversation. What do we do here? And how does what you do help us do that?
Dave, it's been wonderful speaking with you. If people want to find out more, what's the best place they can go and find out?
Well, I mean, if you're a long-term listener to the podcast, then show notes for the episode and all that sort of stuff, because you already know where it is. My name's really weird, burkus.com. DavidBurkus.com will work, but I doubt you'll remember that. So check in with them, and they'll send links and all of that sort of stuff there. If you forgot all of that and you really do want to pull up Google, the good news is I'm basically the only David Burkus out there. So that's good too.
Perfect. I'll make sure to get the links down in the description below, including a link to the book, Pick a Fight. David, it's been wonderful having you here, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Yeah, thanks again so much for having me back.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders, and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they're backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.